Following Daniel Quinn's October 1998 appearance at Rice University in Houston, Mr. Quinn conducted several follow-up sessions. These talks were designed to expand on some of the comments made during the Rice University event, as well as to answer some commonly asked questions about his ideas. This session was devoted to the often asked question, what is the book Ishmael about?
The concept of this evening is that people are always being stumped when their friends and relatives say to them, well, what is this book that you're trying to get me to read? What is this book about? And my usual answer to people who ask me what they should say is, I say, don't even try to explain to them what it's about, because even I couldn't do that adequately. Instead, tell them what the book did for you. And it's a good answer, but I've gotten tired of it, and I thought I would try to come up with a different one. I was thinking about the fact that, of course, everyone knows that the book is in an unusual form. It doesn't proceed thematically. It doesn't tell you what it's about. It doesn't have chapter titles, for example. It doesn't have sections that are labeled that will clue you in to what the subject of the book is or what the progression of ideas is going to be or anything like that. People have asked me, well, why did you do it as a novel at all? Why didn't you just say all this stuff straight out and not fool around with this gorilla and all that story and all that stuff? And my answer is that I didn't know how to do it that way. I don't think I could have done it that way, and I still don't think I could have done it that way, although I did try and failed. And so I began to look to see if I could think about a book in a different way and try to identify the major themes of the book, which I'd never done before, believe it or not. I didn't start out with a list of themes. I started out exactly as the book proceeds. That is, with trying to reach the mind of someone who is receptive and wanted to have a new mind. And I addressed the problem that way. And I knew where I wanted to get by the end of the book. And if you've read my Ishmael, the same is true there. I knew where I wanted to get. I knew where I had to bring Julie, and the rest was just a matter of figuring out what strategy to use to get her from point A to point B. And I've noticed over the last few years that in talking to audiences during every Q&A session, I'll find myself saying, well, the main theme of Ishmael, or of all my writings, is this. And then 10 minutes later, I'll be saying, well, you must realize that the main theme of everything I'm saying is this. And, of course, that means something completely different. And so I've tried to identify or remember what those things are that I've said are the main themes of my work. And I'm trying to reshuffle all of my thinking into a set of things that can be identified as themes. And the idea of this is that perhaps this will help you when people ask you what this book is about and what it means. Certainly one of the themes of my work is that we are teaching and have taught our children a false history of the human race. And what exactly is the lie that we unknowingly teach our children about human history? Yes?
We tell our children that human history began 10,000 years ago between the Tigris and Euphrates, with agriculture beginning and the spread of people throughout the earth. And the lie is that that's how humans live. That's the only way they've lived before. That's the only way they live now. And there are no other lifestyles other than this.
The lie is that our history is the history of humanity itself. And the second part of that question is, what difference does it make that we teach them this lie? Because I'm sure people wonder, why is Quinn beating this particular drum? What difference does it make what our children believe human history is?
I'd like to have a go at that. One of the reasons we have what we call civilization, and it operates the way we think of it, is back in the old days, when it was the woolly mammoth and even on up into 10,000 years ago, human beings lived in constant terror under an assault by nature, and the rule of the day was starvation or getting eaten by an animal or bit by a snake. And what civilization does is keep those dangers at bay. And I realize to what extent that I've always assumed that the reason we have what we have is because we don't starve to death. And the idea that human beings before 10,000 years ago had a sort of happy life that was not near as stressful or difficult or dangerous as ours struck me as being weird when I first heard it. But the more I think about it, the more I think it's true. I mean, I'll take I don't know what the rattlesnake fatality rate was on Native Americans, but I would guess it would be no worse than our death toll from alcoholism or the freeway.
That's certainly true. The point that I make in my Ishmael is that no species comes into existence by failing. And so ours was not a failing species at all when we were Homo habilis or Homo erectus, or when we first became Homo sapiens. We were a successful species. And if you go among hunting and gathering peoples, you will not find miserable people. You certainly won't find people who walk in terror of their lives at every moment. Rattlesnakes really can't just attack for fun because they have only so much venom, and it would be evolutionarily unstable for them to attack pointlessly, unthreatened, and for some reason other than to get prey. Because then, if they were to attack, they would put themselves in jeopardy from the next attack that came on them, because they would have used up all their venom attacking targets that don't have any value to them. But we haven't quite got to the issue of what difference it makes to teach our children this lie, what harm this lie does. By teaching our children this lie, we confirm to them that we are destined. Humanity was destined to live this way. And over again, you'll hear people say this. Well, maybe it was just all meant to be this way. If you haven't already heard it, I can tell you I certainly have many times. Maybe it was all just meant to be this way. Maybe we were meant to devastate the world. Of course, you must ask, meant by whom? Because it's the old post hoc, propter hoc thing, you see, because we ended up dominating the planet. Therefore, it had to happen this way. There could have been no other way for it to happen. It was destined. It was fated. It was inevitable. And we reinforce this in the way we teach history, as if all of humanity, the whole river of human life, was meant to be channeled down to our particular one culture, and all the rest were meant to disappear. So in my own list, I think of these as two themes, but they are related themes. I will, when I'm in conversation with people, even people that know nothing about Ishmael, or, it's not about Ishmael, or it's not about anything at all, and people will say things like, well, what do you expect? Cutting down the rainforest, that's just the way that people are. And I'll say, no, that's not the way people are. That's the way we are. That's people of one culture. That's not humanity here that's doing this. This is one culture. People are always asking me, well, what can I do? What can I do? Well, you can be alert to remind people, and it will come as news to them, and they'll say, Oh, well, I see what you mean. And you don't have to teach them everything that's in Ishmael or in any of my books to do that. I write letters to editors all the time. I recently wrote a letter to the editors at Scientific American about a statement in one of the articles there to the effect that humanity began to abandon the hunting-gathering life and to take up farming 10,000 years ago. This is just completely false. This is untrue. It didn't happen that way. One people took up agriculture, and all the rest went on exactly as before. I came across a quote in a magazine, Natural History. It was a quote from Max Planck, something to this effect: important new ideas usually don't become accepted by overcoming the resistance of people one by one. Rather, the opposition dies out, and the people who come up, they are coming up with this idea already in place. And this is certainly what's going to happen with the ideas that I'm bringing forth here. I don't even worry about the people who disagree with me. I know there are people who disagree with me. Of course there are people who disagree with me. Mother Culture disagrees with me. But they are dying out, and the young people who are hearing this will grow up with these ideas, and they won't even know where the ideas came from. And I don't care. Moving on to another theme of Ishmael. On the basis of what you've learned from Ishmael, how would you complete this sentence? What's killing us is cultural mythology, not blank.
Take a stab at it. I would say not a failure of human nature.
Yes. It would also, it would have been correct to say not original sin, not some horrible flaw, unerasable flaw in humanity. But as you encounter other people, you'll find that that's an idea that is absolutely ingrained in our culture, is that everyone is absolutely certain that humans are destructive, evil, selfish, wretched, violent, horrible creatures. Especially men, of course. And you can see that this is part of the whole complex of ideas here, because we are humanity. Therefore, humanity is us. And all of the things that we do are native to humanity, therefore. And so if we're thoughtless for the future and care only for what we can grab today, then that's the way humans are, because we are humanity after all. In order to be perfect in the Christian paradigm, we have to watch ourselves all the time. You must struggle with your innate sinfulness. In Buddhism, you have to struggle with something else, with your innate tendency to want things. I find one of the most difficult things for people to get their heads around is the power of our cultural mythology. It's not that our mythology is more powerful than any others. All mythologies are powerful. The power of the mythology that was driving people in the 20s and 30s in Germany, the people of Germany were ready, had been ready for decades. They were ready to believe that somebody had to be responsible for the terrible things that had happened to them in World War I and in the decades after. They couldn't just let this go. They had to find someone to blame this on. And of course they blamed it on the Jews. And they conceived of cleansing Germany of the Jewish race as a great boon. And they conceived of it as a purification of the human race itself. And that the Jews literally threatened to overcome the human race. They considered them literally poison, literally a disease upon the human race. And Hitler expected to be viewed in the future as the savior of mankind by extinguishing the Jews. There you see a powerful mythology, and anyone who at that time would have been opposing that mythology would have put himself at great risk. But also, I don't know, what would people have said? Would people have said, why are you doing this? What difference does it make that what people's mythology is? People certainly say that to me. They can't see, they have a hard time seeing that to attack our mythology is doing something. Doing something is writing a letter to your congressman, or chaining yourself to a tree, not buying fur, recycling, of course, composting your garbage. Those are doing things. But to attempt to oppose our cultural mythology, that's not doing anything. People ask me sometimes whether I would do anything different if I had Ishmael to write now. And although I don't really think much about that, because I always have another book to write, and I'm always, other books are gone. They're in the past. It's like, would you have a different child if you could? The child's already born. And one of the things that I did not do very well in Ishmael was to articulate the story, or the cultural mythology, if you like, of the leavers as opposed to the takers. I was able to articulate the cultural mythology of the takers very clearly and forcefully. I did a great job with that. But when it came to the leaver counterpart, I didn't do as good a job with that. I knew at the time it wasn't a great job. It was the best job I could do at that time. It was partly that I erred in trying to make a story that was parallel to ours, that had all the same elements as ours, and I didn't really know what those elements were. It was only recently, in fact, that I realized that I had already articulated their story, but I hadn't identified it as their story, because it also doesn't sound very much like a story. But it is, and here it is. There is no one right way to live. As I say, it doesn't sound like a story, but it actually is a story, because that was the story that was being enacted in the New World when we arrived here. This was perhaps the one thing that every nation and tribe in the New World could have agreed on, absolutely. And they had utterly no difficulty with this idea, because every way was different. This tribe's way was nothing like the way of the tribe next door. The Aztecs didn't go around trying to make the people around them into Aztecs. They might conquer them, and they did conquer them, but they didn't try to impose their way of life on them. They didn't care about that at all. They didn't think they had the one right way to live. And this is one of the reasons why the native peoples here fell to our power. It never occurred to them that we might be possessed of such a strange idea that there is one right way for people to live, and that we would come and try and make them abandon the way that they were living to live our one right way. It was such a strange idea that they had no defense against it. It didn't occur to them that they would ever have to prevent anyone from making them live their way, because no one had ever done that. Peoples had moved, peoples had conquered other peoples, peoples probably wiped out other people. But the idea of making everyone in the world live a single way simply never occurred to them. All of my ideas, I think they're difficult for people because there's no framework in people's heads for them to fit into. It's like putting books in a bookcase that's turned on its side. You put the book on the shelf, and naturally it just falls to the bottom of the case. It doesn't work. And that's what happens with the things I'm saying in my books. And this is certainly nothing that I'm proud of or pleased about. I just had no idea how difficult it would be for people to hang on to what they read in my books and make sense of them. people ask me what I think of animal rights, and I say, I don't even know what human rights are. Moving on to a new theme here. Why would Ishmael not agree with the frequently heard Christian injunction that we must be good stewards of the world? Here we see again the idea of humans as flawed coming up, that we've let the flawed people be the stewards of the world, and they're wrecking it, and so we must think of good stewardship instead. But people don't like to hear that the world got along very well without any kind of human stewardship, good or evil, for 3 billion years, and that the living community got along very well without us around directing traffic or deciding whether whales should be hunted or not, or how many. And they definitely resent the idea that we don't know how to run the world. I think it a great liberation that the world knows how to run the world, and or that gods know how to run the world, and they don't require our assistance. They don't require our taking over the job from them. I'm happy to live with that idea. Now all we have to do is think of how to pry human fingers off the controls. Mother Culture replies that all of our problems will be solved through technology if we just sort of we just have to sit around and do nothing and wait for the right technological solutions to come out of somewhere. And so meanwhile, we just sit here and bite our fingernails, cross our fingers, and everything like that, and just wait for someone to come up with great new technologies.
We want a technological fix. I mean, we still are getting that as a mother culture solution, that if we just stay the course, whether it's with the internet or, example, I think in today's New York Times debate over how we get to, in the treaty, to a system of trading rights on essentially contamination, so that third world nations may be able to buy rights or sell rights to the United States or other countries, because obviously we understand that with the carbon output that we are killing the planet, not just the ozone layer, but the heating it up. So we need a one world answer to that, a completely regulated world. And that is the answer to it. I mean, that's what the mother culture tells me.
Yes, that's right. And it makes perfect sense if humanity was destined to live this way. If our destiny was for everyone on the planet to live the same way, then of course, why not have one super government deciding everything? I tend to think this is one of those deals where at first it's only an inch, but the inch becomes 2 inches and 4 inches and 8 inches, and gradually there has to be an agreement about everything. I think that if you ask most people, certainly in the U.S., they would agree that everyone should follow our laws. Ours are the most enlightened laws in the world. I mean, if you just took a poll and you said, okay, here's what the people in Africa do. Do you think that's okay, or do you think they should live the way we do? And to a certain extent, Amnesty International is putting itself in the position of saying, we know how everybody should live, and we have the true gen on what people's rights are. And I think a lot of people are prepared to say, yeah, they've got the highest standards of all, so that's what we should adopt. But what works in the community of life is diversity. It will not work for all mammals to be ground squirrels. It just absolutely will not work. It wouldn't work for all birds to be storks. It wouldn't work for all snakes to be copperheads. It wouldn't work for all insects to be locusts. The whole system works because there's diversity. And that diversity worked among humans as well for all time, from the beginning until just the last 10,000 years. when the people of our culture began the great crusade to extinguish that diversity among humans. So the idea that our salvation lies in the direction of more and more uniformity, even on some issues, is something I have to challenge. I can't doubt for a moment that diversity is what works. But I know that people are disappointed in me in that I have not given them another one right way. What's wrong with me? Why am I holding back this way? And they're quite puzzled when I try to make the point that the problem is not that ours is a wicked way or an evil way. The problem is that it's the way that 6 billion people are living. If only 1 billion of us were living that way, it wouldn't be great, but it wouldn't be nearly so bad as 6 billion living this way. It's the very fact that we're trying to get everybody on the planet to live this way. That's what is devastating. We don't have to expunge the taker away from the planet. What we have to do is open up directions for other people to live. Another theme of my work is that Mother Culture teaches that not only were we destined to live this way, there couldn't possibly be a better way to live, a sweeter way than the way we live. Therefore, to speak of living another way automatically means living a worse way. And you will always hear people, if you talk about the need for people to live another way, you will always hear them say, well, what are we supposed to give up? Because ours is the perfect way, so if we live another way, we're going to have to give up something from our perfection. This is really a difficult one. I know you'll find this. I mean, people absolutely believe that our way of life could not possibly be improved upon. It's the oddest thing, because these will be the same people who will freely admit that we're devastating the earth, that we have 1 foot over the cliff and are ready to plummet to extinction. All the same, what could be sweeter than what we have? Just couldn't. It's unthinkable that anything could be better.
Does that mean I have to give up my car, cable television, air conditioning? I mean,
Come on. Well, yeah.
And I can't have all this unless I'm in the killer culture. To live well, I have to be killing the rest.
Yeah, the equivalence of living a new way to giving up material things. There's an equivalence there which sees that we have an identification with the material things, cars, air conditioning, blah, 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 as being our good things. And then when you say, well, what about all the bad things? The identification there goes all wonky. You say, what was wrong with that guy who last week lost some utterly worthless job, went home and got his assault rifle and came back and killed his boss and 2 co-workers? What was wrong with that man's life? Was his car on the blink? Was his Game Boy not working? His air conditioning on the blink? Was he not getting enough videotapes? There is just so much that is profoundly wrong with people's lives. I collect these stories. I have an enormous electronic file of them, of people doing the most pitiful things. People at the end of their rope, seeing no hope for the future, dousing their children with gasoline and setting them on fire, and then blowing out their brains. The story from last week. People are in serious trouble. I remember a time, and these were not the good old days by any means. These were very frightening days that I grew up in. But they were not days when things like these that I just described happened every day or every decade. These were unthinkable things. Children getting together to plot the assassination of their parents? A story like that in the 1950s, I'm not sure anybody would have believed it. They would have thought you were making it up. They just absolutely couldn't believe such a thing. Now it's practically happening every week. These people are crying out in terrible pain, and not in just small numbers. And it's not about failure to get as good toys as other people. It's failure to achieve security, to know that your life is going to go on in a reasonable way. When people lose a job nowadays, now they kill themselves. It's remarkable. I mean, even in the Depression, people weren't doing that. They slogged on. But nowadays, it's not just one thing. It's not just the post-industrial absence of jobs. It's the combination of all these things that are driving people crazy. We can't just look at giving up air conditioning and Kleenex and cars and these things. We have to look at what is it these people need? What is it that humans need? And there's the direction we have to go to look for a different life. Not a life of giving up things, but of getting something that people want more.
Correct me if I'm wrong, one of your points is that all of the major religions we now have grew up, and I'm not quoting you, I'm putting it in my own words, grew up as mouthpieces for Taker civilization. Am I misquoting you?
No, I might say it a little differently. I mean, they grew up together and in conversation, always in conversation together, and always seeing things in a way that fits together, so that our major religions are always shaking their finger at the bad things that we do in our culture and telling us we shouldn't value material things as much. We should be nicer people, and so on. And so in the story of B, I said that the major religions are like the wife married to a lout, and always trying to bring her loutish husband up a little bit, to raise his sights a little bit, for God's sake, you know. Get his mind on higher things. And so that works together. The two of them work together. They're compatible. And if they weren't, they would disappear. And the ones that weren't compatible did disappear. That's for sure. That's why they take no notice of the religion I call animism. The religion they call animism doesn't count because it's just irrelevant to us, to the people of our culture. Mother culture teaches that there is no past. Nothing is to be found in the past. Any solutions that save us are going to be ones that we make up, we discover on our own. And in my new book, the book will be coming out in the early months of the year 2000, is called Beyond Civilization, Humanity's Next Great Adventure, which takes off from this point. Natural selection gave us a social organization that worked for humans, just as natural selection gave geese a social organization that works for geese, called a flock. And natural selection gave baboons a social organization that works well for baboons. It's called a troop, and so on. And what works well for humans is the tribe. And it worked well for humans for hundreds of thousands, and perhaps even millions of years, assumedly millions of years. It worked well for people because the tribe is essentially and always, wherever it's found, still untouched, is an egalitarian affair. There is leadership, but the leader is typically not a lord, not a divine being or anything like that. Is not a despot. And I'm not making this up. Every anthropologist will report this. And by golly, you know, people like that. Isn't that peculiar? Isn't it strange that they would like living that way? Living the way we do. Civilization, every civilization, not only ours, but Liber civilizations like the Maya and the Olmec are always hierarchical. There are always people at the top who have a great time. They have all the good stuff. And then there is always a large body in the middle that has it pretty good. They're not going to shake things up. They like what they've got too. Then down at the bottom are the masses, the suffering masses who do all the suffering and do all the shit work and get the short end of the stick always. And they, poor benighted souls, they think, this is not so hot. But the people at the top think it's terrific. And it's no different for us now than it was in Egypt, back when they were building the pyramids. The pyramids were not built by slaves. They were just built by Egyptians of the lower classes. There were slaves in there, of course. We use slave labor ourselves to clear off the sides of roads and do repair work and things like that, chain gangs, convicts, and so on. And we are engaged in exactly the same activity now. Our pyramids are being built for people like Bill Gates and Ted Turner, Donald Trump, IBM, and General Motors. These are the pyramids that the workers of our civilization are slogging their lives away for. Do they like slinging engines into cars any better than the workers on the pyramids like slinging rocks up the side of a pyramid? I don't think so. For the most part, if they had had a chance to live the way people lived when they were living tribally, where there were no people at the top and people at the bottom, they would be much happier. When pressed, Ishmael said, "Well, you consider yourself inventive, don't you?" And the student says, "Yes, we do." And Ishmael said, "Well, invent." And I myself, it took me several years to become really inventive, and so that's the invention of the new book, Beyond Civilization, which is to say, how do we rediscover the tribal organization? Tribalism itself has nothing to do with hunting and gathering. The circus, for example, is a tribal organization. Just as in the hunting and gathering tribe, where those who gather the food are important, and those who hunt the food are important, and those who take care of things like making clothes are important. In the circus, it's the same thing. Everyone is important in the circus. When the circus arrives in town, the people who put up the circus are the most important people. The performers at this point have nothing to do. The people who must work now are the people who put up the tent, for example, and their work, everybody helps. These are the people who must now do this work. And after that, other people become important throughout the stay of the circus, and after the circus, and before the circus. And there is a boss, but everyone wants the boss to succeed. They want the boss to make money. They want the circus to make money because the circus is what gives them a life that they recognize to be good. They like circus life. They want the circus to go on. And you will notice if you go in the back lot of a circus, I'm not talking about the big business circuses, but the smaller circuses, people do not have a whole lot of stuff. They live very simply, not because they're giving up anything, but because they don't need all the things that more miserable people need. And they live very simply. And they don't seem to mind not having all that stuff. They live in very small quarters, very crowded. And they're very ordinary people, but they have a life they really don't want to give up. And so they want the owners to succeed. They want the boss to succeed so that they can go on being in the circus. No one runs away from home to join General Motors. In the tribal organization, the boss has a different job, which is to be the boss. But people don't necessarily envy him or her that job. While I was working through all this material, Rennie and I realized that we had a tribal business at one time in New Mexico. It was quite small. It was a newspaper, and there were 4 members of the tribe. In the beginning, actually during its whole life, at the end of the week, when the paper came out, Rennie would sit down. Rennie was, she was the boss of the paper. Rennie would sit down with Hap and CJ and divvy up what was left after paying for the printing. And that was what we all had to live on. No one envied Rennie for being the boss. She had the worst job of all, no question about it. But someone has to say, this is what we're going to do, and that's what Rennie did. These are the themes I find myself always coming back to, and I'm always talking to every audience about, and describing as the main themes of my work. The importance of promulgating a true history of humanity. The fact that what we have here, was not inevitable. It wasn't fated. It didn't have to happen. The channel of humanity was not destined to run in our little narrow stream. Cultural mythology is what's killing us, and not any flaw in human nature. And of course, there is no one right way to live. We are members of the community, not lords or stewards of the community. And if we hope to go on living on this planet, we'd better start acting like members of the community. It amazes me. People worry, people think of only living for the next 50 years. They just don't seem to mind. They don't mind the idea that our children cannot have grandchildren. They don't mind the idea of humanity disappearing in the next century. It frightens me and amazes me. And we don't have to invent everything from scratch, meaning that the knowledge of how to live on this planet is, to borrow a phrase from elsewhere, is out there. That truth is out there. The rest of the community of life knows how to live, and we must learn from them. They were at it long before we were, and so we don't have to invent how to live. We have to learn how to live from our neighbors in that community.